Italian buttercream. Today we're going to be making Italian buttercream. It's very similar to a French buttercream. The only difference is Italian buttercream is made with egg whites, whereas French buttercream is made with egg yolks. The first thing that I need to get started doing today is going to be the sugar. The sugar we need to cook to a softball stage, which is 248 degrees Fahrenheit. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the sugar into the pot, which I've already done. And on top of that, I'm going to add the water. The water is just going to help dissolve the sugar down. And once you get the water incorporated into the sugar, you want to go ahead and give this a stir to make sure that you get the water mixed throughout the whole sugar mixture. If you don't, sometimes you end up with a dry spot or someplace where there's just sugar. And if there's just sugar, it actually just starts to caramelize and actually not go through the stages that you want to bring it to. A lot of different methods of cooking sugar. I like, when I'm initially starting to cook sugar, to go ahead and start heating this and try to keep it stirring, kind of keep it mixing the whole time. What that does is that kind of helps dissolve the sugar crystals in the water as it's being heated. It can work against you in the fact that you sometimes start knocking sugar crystals up to the side of the pot, which is something that you don't want. But there's several different ways to wash those sugar crystals down once your sugar starts to boil. Okay, the first method would be to take a brush, a clean brush, dip it in warm water, and lightly brush around the outside of the pot to wash those sugar crystals back down into the pot. Or you can use a bowl or a sheet pan or something to go on top of the sugar pot. Give it a couple of minutes. What happens is, as it starts to boil, the steam rises and it kind of washes down the side of the pot for you. And this can work. But with this small amount of sugar, I may want to just go ahead and brush it, because it's going to take probably not a lot of time to actually bring this up to the softball stage of the 248 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Now, once sugar starts to boil, you want to stop stirring it. Okay. So I'm not talking about little bubbles you're seeing on the side. I'm talking about a full rolling boil. You want to stop stirring at that point, because that will just cause the sugar to recrystallize. So with that going, I have a lid, I have some water, so we have several different methods of actually washing that down. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and put in our egg whites, which is 4 ounces of egg whites, into our mixer with a whip attachment attached. I'm going to start that on low speed just to kind of break those egg whites up a little bit. Not really interested in trying to whip the egg whites at this time. I'm just kind of breaking them up a little bit. That way, once I increase the speed, they've been broken up and they'll be ready to whip. Okay? Now, our sugar syrup is getting to the stage where it's almost boiling, so I'm going to give it probably one last stir. I've got some sugar crystals on the outside of the pot. I'm going to have to wash those down. But that's as far as I can go as far as stirring. Once it starts to boil rapidly like this, I don't want to actually stir the sugar anymore, which will cause it to recrystallize. So with some warm water, I'm dipping my brush and I'm just going around the outside of the pot to wash those sugar crystals down back into the sugar solution. Being very careful not to let the brush actually touch the sugar solution. Now, you don't need to do this a lot. You just need to do it just until you get all the sugar crystals washed down into the pot. Once they have washed down into the pot, you're probably going to be okay as far as the cooking of the sugar goes. Check the temperature once in a while. A good digital thermometer works really well to make sure you don't go beyond your 248 degrees Fahrenheit. Right now it's at 226, 227, somewhere around there. So I don't think it's going to take very long from now. So I'm going to go ahead and increase our speed on our egg whites. They foamed up a little bit, but they're not quite to the stage that I want to start adding the sugar to. Now this buttercream does have 2 additions of sugar. One, you're going to add to the egg whites directly to kind of help stabilize them. And then the second is going to be the cooked sugar, which is actually going to cook the egg whites as it gets mixed. Once I start to get the egg whites to start to peak a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and start adding my first addition of granulated sugar, which is 5 ounces of granulated sugar. And this will just kind of help keep the egg whites stable as they're whipping until my sugar, my cooked sugar, is up to 248 degrees Fahrenheit. Sugar's coming along pretty fast. It's up to 230, so I don't think it's going to be very long until this is ready. Now, when you go to pour the sugar solution into your egg whites, the trick is to pour this in such a way that it's going in between the whisk and the bowl. Try to pour it into the egg whites itself. It doesn't always work out too well, but if you pour it to where it's hitting the whip, it'll actually just throw it up against the side of the bowl and it's not really getting incorporated. And you don't want it to roll down the side of the bowl because then it will just stick to the side of the bowl and it really won't get incorporated in either. So it's kind of a tricky operation to get the sugar get poured in there just right. When this sugar reaches 248 degrees, you cannot hesitate to pour it into your egg whites that have been whipped. Because pretty much so, when this sugar is ready, it needs to go immediately. If you wait too long, the sugar gets up to more of a harder crack, and it doesn't incorporate into the sugar or into the egg whites, and then it just makes a mess. 48. Good. I generally slow the speed down just a little bit when I add the sugar because I don't want the sugar, just in case it hits the whip, to come back and hit you in the face. You want to pour it in a steady stream right into the egg whites. Don't drive yourself too crazy about getting all the sugar out of the pot. You've probably got enough out of there, it shouldn't be a problem. Once you get the sugar incorporated, you'll want to crank the speed up on this and whip it until it goes completely cold. In a small mixer, sometimes it takes a little bit of time because it actually causes a little bit more friction than it does cool down. But you do want to whip this until this goes completely cold before you start adding your butter to it, because if you don't, you're going to make kind of a soft buttercream that there's no real recovering from. It makes it very difficult to work with. In fact, I've had a lot of failures that way. So just a point of interest, make sure your butter is soft, pliable, and that your sugar egg whites are completely cold, or at least room temperature, before you start adding the butter. Now that we've cooked the sugar and we've got it into the meringue, our meringue now is cooled down to the point to where it no longer feels warm anymore. So now it's time to go ahead and start adding the butter to our buttercream. Usually when I add butter to a buttercream, I will add it to the mixer while it's on a relatively low speed. I've had students before drop the butter into the machine while it was on high, and it's thrown back at them. What I just dropped in there was the shortening. A little bit of shortening is in this recipe, and that helps stabilize the buttercream a little bit. So I'll just continue adding the butter to this. It does still have the whip on. Most of the time when I'm talking about using any type of a mixer and you're adding butter, I always say do not use a whip. This is the only time that butter is used. Now the butter that we're putting into this is not cold out of the refrigerator. It's relatively soft and pliable, so it's actually going to mix in and not actually ruin or bend any of the wires on your whip. So you can add the butter in at this point. The butter, I'm guessing, is probably about 70 or so degrees. It's soft, it's pliable, but not necessarily extremely soft, and it's certainly not melted, because that's not what you want. You don't want melted butter in there. You continue adding the butter to this very slowly, chunk at a time. Kind of wait till that kind of gets mixed in, and then you add in the next one. Sometimes they get caught up. Now, as you're mixing this, your buttercream may go through what I call an ugly stage. It's going to look like it's going to be separating out. As long as your butter is at a good temperature and you've allowed your eggs to cool down enough after you've added the hot sugar to them, it will come together. So just have a little patience and it should all come together. And then other times you get really lucky and it just looks absolutely beautiful the whole way through. It never hits that ugly stage. Now the amount of butter that I put into 4 ounces of egg whites is basically 1 pound 4 ounces, which seems like a lot of butter, and it really is for the quantity of sugar that we use. This is a lot of butter. Buttercreams, a lot of people say, oh, it just tastes like butter. Well, it is basically butter. The sugar in there does sweeten it to a certain extent, but it's a very rich icing, and you don't have to use a lot of it when you're using a really good buttercream.
There's no flavoring in it at this point.
If you wanted to, you could actually flavor this at this point. You could put a liqueur, you could put vanilla, you could put any kind of flavoring in there that you wanted to flavor your buttercream. Or if after you've made it, you can always add it then, but sometimes it has, depending on the type of flavoring you're putting in, sometimes it doesn't get incorporated that well. So it's best to do it early on in the stage when you're flavoring a buttercream. Right now I've got all the butter in there. And it looks like it still has butter chunks in there, so I'm going to go ahead and increase the speed up a little bit to try to get this to come together. The way I know buttercream is starting to come together, and it's almost to the point to where it's done, is that the look of the buttercream starts to change. The sound of the buttercream slapping against the side of the bowl, it has kind of a sound change. It seems relatively subtle when you first hear it. But it will go through almost a sound change. Have a little patience with it. Looking beautiful right now, nice and smooth. Didn't really go through that ugly stage, staying a nice light, pale, yellow in color. Now once it starts to slap up against the side of the bowl, I will generally go ahead and scrape the bowl down really well to make sure I've got everything off the bottom of the bowl, everything out of the whip, and get it incorporated really well, and then give it another couple minutes on the high speed just to incorporate that nicely to make sure everything is blended together well. That way we don't have any chunks of butter. There's nothing worse than trying to ice a cake and then running across a chunk of butter when you're trying to ice a cake. Didn't really go through much of a sound change at all, but from the looks of it, it looks like it's pretty good. Go ahead and scrape the bowl down, make sure we've got everything off the side. I don't want any butter or meringue at the bottom of the bowl. I'm going to go ahead and get all that incorporated into the buttercream nicely. And then just give this another couple minutes and it should be just marvelous.